Welcome to Before First Gear, a series where I sit down with top racers to learn how they got started, honed their skills, and some of the unique challenges they faced along the way. Every racer has a story, and I look forward to hearing it. I'm joined by Davy Jones, the 1996 All-Out Le Mans winner, winner of the Daytona 24, multiple Indianapolis 500 starts, a second place in Indy. What else am I forgetting, Davey? You've driven NASCARs, Indy cars, Formula One cars?
I have tested for two different Formula One teams. You know, I like to say that I'm one of those drivers that enjoy driving a multiple, sector of vehicles and cars, whether it's asphalt, dirt, snow, wet weather. To me, vehicle is a vehicle and you just have to adapt to it as a driver and drive it. So it's really nice to see currently, Kyle Larson and the likes of him, driving multiple different stuff all the time, not only just one series. It used to be that way back in the, the Foyt and the Rutherford days and Unser days and so on. And then it kind of got away from it. And I did a little bit of the, the Daytona, the Charlotte 600 and the Indy 500 and so on. And then it kind of got away from it. And now it's coming back to where, if you drive multiple stuff, you're in your game. You're on top of it.
You're saying, so you actually, one of the first racing schools that you went to was Brundle Roos?
I was racing quarter midgets way back when, and I it was just a family hobby for us. And we went to Formula One race at Watkins Glen, New York. That's where my dad and myself was introduced to Brundle Roos. He had a little display there for his school, and I was only 14 years old. And Brundle just said, well, hey, come to Pocono Raceway, and if you can reach the pedals, we'll put you in the car.
So that was you're 14 when you first got into a Brundle Roos car. It's probably the same cars that Brundle Roos is using today, frankly, if they're still using from back then. So then you went right from quarter midgets into kind of that Brundle Roos school car, and I guess were you doing karting at all, or is quarter midgets, is that on ovals or is that karting technically?
Well, quarter midgets was on asphalt, and they were small, little 1/10 mile or 1/20th mile oval tracks. In quarter midgets, you can start as young as the age of 5, and you graduate up into the different classes. And for me, kind of the people that I was racing against in quarter midgets, a couple of the drivers like Doug Hebron, for example, he went super modified racing. We're racing quarter midgets out. Our home track was Syracuse Fairgrounds in upstate New York. The upstate New York kind of racing scene was modified, super modifieds. You had Weedsport, you had Oswego, and the likes of that. So some of my main competitors in quarter midgets, their next step was to go super modified racing or modified racing. And I had the mindset like, well, I don't really want to race the same people at the same track every Saturday night. So we looked into going road racing, and we looked at Formula Ford racing, where you go to, mid-Ohio, you go to Watkins Glen, you go to Pocono Raceway, all the different tracks, Lime Rock, for example. And that's when we had gone to Watkins Glen for the Formula One race to take in that kind of scene and what's going on and learn a little bit about it. And that's when we were introduced to Brundle Roos.
Were you at that point, you were already looking into going into Formula Ford when you met Brundle Roos, or kind of that helped to ignite that?
Well, we didn't know. We as a family, we did it as a hobby. We never knew where it was going to take us, if it was going to take us anywhere. It's not that we had set this kind of, outline that, I'm going to become a professional racing driver. It was a family hobby. We went quarter midget racing, and had a good time with that. And, because I did so well at it, it was like the next step was, what was it? Was it Formula Ford? Was it something else? Brundle Roos was able to really kind of guide us and help us in that direction. But, well, for racing, it's where the path is going to take you. You just you don't know. For me, when I went through Burroughs School, although I was only 14 years of age at the time, I was the quickest student that had ever gone through the school. And I always look at you know whatever you do, it's a key factor is who you know, first of all. If you know somebody that's connected, they can really help guide you to be in the right place at the right time. Really, really important is being in the right place at the right time. And when I went through the driving or through Burroughs School, the sports editor for the New York Times, Steve Schaefer, he happened to go through the school at the same time with me. He was so impressed that here the 14-year-old kid was just, laying down these laps and was so naturally talented that he wrote this article in the New York Times. Well,
No way. Okay.
so that got the attention of people that we knew in New York City in the business sector, and they were able to kind of help introduce us and help us support us to kind of take that next level with Bordeaux, to go Formula Ford racing.
Did Brundle have a racing series at that point, or it was just a school and then into a racing series?
Well, he was putting together a race series, and so he was helping us, guiding us is what the next step was. But I was only 14 years of age, so
Sure.
to go SCCA racing, you had to be 18 years of age. So for about a year and a half, I would go to Pocono Raceway every weekend or every other weekend, and I would just do lapping sessions with Brundle, and he would just coach me along and just train me, um, to the point to where he would stand on an apex of a corner, literally stand his 2 feet on the curb of an apex of the corner, and if I didn't clip that apex, he would throw the clipboard at the car at me. And like here I am, I'm a 15-year-old kid, and I'm turning into the corner, and here he is standing right on the apex. And do I come within a foot of him, or do I take him out? So if I didn't get within like a half a foot of his whereas he was standing, he would throw the clipboard at me, and that only action, I think it happened maybe twice, but it's a memory that I have. He was very strict, and when he asked to do something a certain way, that's what he expected you to do. So during that time, from about 14 years of age to about 16, Michael Andretti was coming through the program at Burroughs School, being not far from Pocono, being in Nazareth, Pennsylvania. So with Michael Andretti and Bordeaux, they put together a program through Starbright, which was automotive cleaning products and so on, to take Michael Formula Ford racing through SCCA. So that kind of pushed me aside a little bit because I wasn't quite yet of age. Michael and Bordeaux and that they had a race team that they got going to start the whole kind of Formula Ford racing program. So in the meantime, since I was now becoming 16 years of age, um, my dad decided, well, let's go to Canada and race Formula Ford. So my dad had purchased two PRS Formula Ford cars, truck and trailer. We got hooked up with John Powell Racing School out of Mossport Park, and we went up there. And as I became 16 years of age, I started racing Formula Fords up in Canada, up in Ontario.
Where did you grow up, Davey? You're upstate New York?
So I did. I was born and raised just outside of Chicago, in Illinois. And when we, the place that we had in Illinois, my dad, we had like 19 acres, and in the early years, my dad had brought home a go kart and a mini bike. When my dad was paving in our driveway, he decided to pave around the barn and then back into the driveway. So make like a go-kart track. And so we went from like two go-karts to like eight go-karts. And and he had taken a yellow paint and divided it right down the center of the kind of the track around the barn, so we would stay in our lane. So my dad had purchased this ski resort in upstate New York that he bought it out of bankruptcy, not with the intention to open it up to the public, for use and so on. But it was a unique, ski resort. Had some lifts and had, it was mainly for
That's
the
awesome.
mainly for the property that he bought it for. And so we moved everything to upstate New York. I was probably 12 at that time. We had land to ride our motorcycles and so on around, but we didn't have any place to really ride our go-karts. He discovered that there had this little go-kart track at Syracuse Fairgrounds. So we took some go-karts up there one afternoon, and we were practicing around the track. And then in came that evening came these quarter midgets and mic rods. So the quarter midgets were more of like a tube frame chassis with a roll cage, and looked really trick. And then these mic rods had like a wooden kind of body around them. They weren't very appealing at all. They were more like a go kart with a body. So with these quarter midgets, it's like, hey, let's see if we can start racing quarter midgets. That's what happened. We got a quarter midget, and I went out and started winning races right away, and that's really what we did as a family hobby, and it was fun.
So this is like 1976 or so, 77, something like that. Do you think that it was less competitive, or there was less overall go-karting happening in America at the time? I mean, if I look at someone who today is winning the 24 Hours of Le Mans or whatever it is, it's an American driver. They started when they were 5 years old in go-karts. There's a ladder system of karting,
Sure.
serious teams. So it was totally different at that point. Yeah.
Sure. The thing with the go karts is that you had to be 18 years of age. You had to be, yeah. I'm pretty sure it was 18, maybe 16 in some categories, but it wasn't so easy as a 7, 8 year old, 9 year old kid to go kart racing. So that's why if you look at a lot of the top drivers, over the last 20 years, they've all started in quarter midgets. I also call also you see a lot of parents, they'll have their kids in tennis, for example, and they'll have the kids will be at the tennis club every day, and they'll have professional coaches coach them, and they're kick-ass tennis players, and they're strong, but by the time they become of age, 16, 18 years old, they want to go off and do something else. They're burnt out on tennis, so they go off and do something else, and that's something that Brundle had said in the New York Times article that was written, was that Davy is a very talented, and he can be an incredible race driver, but by the time he's 18, he may just have interest in girls and not cars. So when I turned
So
18, I called Brundle and I says, "Hey, Brundle," I says, "I'm 18 years of age and I am interested in girls, but I am interested in cars still as well."
so at this point, then you ran some karting stuff. You and your dad go up to Canada, and you did some of your first Formula Ford racing at Mo Sport and some local tracks in the Canadian series, because you could be younger at that point. Which, by the way, I think that's the only thing that, as we've gotten more to the future, it's the only thing where I've seen that they let people do things that are less safe now. Usually anything that's fun, they've gotten rid of at this point,
Yeah,
but that's pretty
yeah.
cool.
I had tried to go SCCA racing at the age of 16, and they wouldn't allow it. They wouldn't allow any waivers. They wouldn't allow anything. Actually, we had submitted all our stuff as my brother, um, you know, Davy Jones, age 18, and we got all the credentials to go SCCA racing. I had done the first 3 or 4 races, and they knew right away that I wasn't 18 years of age. I mean, I was winning races. Michael Andretti was part of it, racing so on, and they'd question me like, how old are you? And I'd say I was 18, but I sounded like I was 12, so they figured out that I wasn't 18 years of age, so I had to go to Canada and race, which is age 16, for 2 years, and I won both Ontario championships up in Canada for 2 years, and then I came back to the States at age 18 and started racing the Bosch Super V series.
Super V at that point, those are the next step above Formula Ford.
It is. It's very similar to a Formula 3 car or a Formula Atlantic car. Just
Yeah.
different wheel specs, different engine specs, and so on. So, when I went Super V racing at age 18, when I was allowed, I was racing with Michael Andretti and Al Jr. and the likes, and so on.
Was there a very clear progression that you would take then at that point? Were you saying, I'd like to go try to become a professional racer and I need to do this, this, and this to get there?
Well, still at that point, we didn't know. We were doing it as a family hobby. And when you're racing against the likes of Michael Andretti and Alan Jr. and so on, their motivation is IndyCar, and the next step, the next step, the next step. Because I had done so well and I was so competitive and I was young, it's going back to who you know. A good friend of ours that we had met, William Smith, out of Norwich, New York, just down the road from where I lived. He happened to not only own a car dealership in Norwich, New York, but he was also a major partner in McLaren Engines out of Detroit. So he was able to have Ron Dennis come up to our home in upstate New York, um, to spend a few days and talk to me about racing and where do we go from Super V racing and so on. So with the likes of Ron Dennis, I was going to England to race Formula 3 under the McLaren banner. So I did.
Holy
I did.
shit.
So I did 2 races in 1982 towards the tail end of the Super V Series, Formula 3 in the UK, and that kind of spurred things for me to go over and do a full season in the British Formula 3 Championship in 1983.
But before you get there, so with Ron Dennis, says, Dave, you seem like a nice guy. Come race for McLaren over here, or is that something where you're bringing X amount of dollars to the table to support a couple races, and then he had a car over there, so it's kind of like a rent a race car sort of deal?
So it was a program to where McLaren had helped source out the team, the Formula 3 team, and they would support the Formula 3 team for me, but I had to bring my own kind of like living expenses. So if
Sure.
I supported myself over there, they would take care of kind of the racing side of it. So fortunately, we were in a position where my father could say, hey, you go over there, you live over there, and we'll take care of all your expenses.
Sure.
Um,
And just so you know, it's been a topic for sure. A wide array of folks I've spoken to about the funding aspect, obviously, where, usually the family is able to get someone to a certain level and then it just gets astronomical, the financing, especially in the last, say, decade with some of the drivers I've been speaking to. But I think a big talking point has been that the cost of racing in the 70s and 80s was fractional compared to what it is today. It was probably a lot more digestible to say, okay, I can fund a few races in a Formula 3 series.
I look at it now at some of the budgets of what they're getting, and it's just astronomical. And I look back at what my father was spending. Here I am. I'm 15, 16, 18-year-old kid, and I'm just kind of doing what I'm being asked is to drive these cars and to work on them and to do stuff and so on. Through the years, even when I was racing Formula Ford, ironically, we had Chip Ganassi come in and drive our second car for us for a few races. So I was teammates with Chip, and to see, fast forward, 35 years and to see where Chip has gone is just it's just phenomenal and great. But yes, it was. I'm sure it was very expensive back then, but not nearly what it is now. We were fortunate that we had, support from friends and people that we had known in the business.
All right, so you get over to the UK and you're running in Formula 3 now. And I think that was the same year that Ayrton Senna was also running in Formula 3.
So yeah, so I did two races in towards the end of the 1982 season, and then it was all geared up for the 1983 season, the British Formula 3 series. Here I was 18 years old, just becoming 19 during that 83 season. My main competitors was Ayrton Senna and Martin Brundle and Calvin Fish, Merrill Hyten and Johnny Dumfries, and the list goes on. So it was very competitive, and it was at that point to where I realized, working with another team, that all this team does, this is what they do for a living, this is their business, and it's just all racing. That at that point you realize, like, okay, you've got to step up and you've got to make this a career, or you've got to go on and do something else.
So when you decided, all right, maybe it's time for me to start thinking about this very seriously, then all of a sudden was your North Star, let me get into Formula One? Was it, did you have your sights set on something? Was it, let me get back to the States, get into IndyCar or NASCAR? What were you thinking at that point? Do you remember?
Well, at that point, it was going Formula One racing, and
Yeah.
again, we didn't know a whole lot about Formula One, but when you're living in the UK, and you're every Thursday you're waiting for Autosport to come out so you can read all the racing kind of jibber jab for the week and what's going on and who's on first and who's on second and so on. It really gets your kind of motivation to go towards Formula One. And with the help with McLaren and as a young driver trying to help you take that next step, whatever that next step may be, I had the opportunity to drive my first Formula One car halfway through the 1983 season for Brabham. Bernie Ecclestone had approached me during the Silverstone Formula One race, and asked if I would be available to drive and test the car at Brands Hatch. Brabham was talking to an American sponsor, Del Monte, and I believe that they were in discussion that they had an American driver that they were bringing along. So again, this is one of the reasons I believe why I was put in the Brabham car to test at Brands Hatch was all part of, you know, kind of a plan of what Bernie Ecclestone had with Brabham, and of course, it was okayed by McLaren and Ron Dennis for that to happen.
Let me get an American guy to see if I can appease the potential American sponsors. Were you one of the few American drivers in that Formula 3 series at that point?
Yes, there was another American driver, my teammate Eric Lane. He was from New York as well, and his dad was an executive with 3M, and so he was able to help support the team, and he would help support my program through 3M. There was Eric Lane, and there's Canadian Alan Berg that has a
Oh, yeah.
racing school at Laguna Seca now. But really, that was really only the three of us from kind of North America over there racing.
So, how was it then? I mean, racing then a full season that next year in Formula 3 in this extremely competitive field.
So I look at why Brazilians do so phenomenal at racing. Brazilians, they do great in karting, and then they come to England, to race, or they come to the States to race, and they don't speak the language, they don't know anybody, all they do is just eat, breathe, sleep, motor racing, and they do very well. Well, when I went to England, I didn't know anybody. I spoke the language, fortunately, but all I did was just I was with the team, or I was just focused on racing and what we had to do. So so for me, that was a huge step to go to England and to race. um, and we there was like 20, 21 races in the championship, so we were in the car every weekend. We were racing and we were testing during the week, and but it was a challenge in the way that here I was 18, becoming 19 years of age, and Martin Brundle was a couple of years older than me. Aryton Senna was a couple of years older than me. They had done, they knew the tracks over there. They'd come out of Formula 4 2000 and so on, and took the next progression into Formula 3. Um, so it was always like I always had to really push a little harder or work a little harder to learn the tracks and kind of learn their game. Ayrton Senna, I mean, he came out of the box and won the first 10 races. I mean, he was on his game naturally. And Martin Brundle, he was quick. He would really push Ayrton Senna, and he was on his game as well. For myself, I finished third in the championship, and I would look at that year. It was Ayrton, Martin Brundle, and then it was myself, and then there was a big gap. I think there was a little bit of a gap between myself and Martin Brundle. Um, but if any one of the two of them made a mistake, I was right there. So,
Yeah.
it just goes, over experience and youth, really.
And you had just finished high school then when you went over there?
I did, yes.
So then from Formula 3, you get a test with Ecclestone in the F1 car. But then did you continue in Formula 3 the next year? So I guess it's what, 1984?
I did. When I tested the Formula One car, and again, it was probably a little bit too quick for me to get into a Formula One car, or maybe it wasn't the right Formula One car for me to get into, because Nelson Piquet had just won the championship with that car, and it was the B52 Brabham that was kind of the turbo air. And when I tested the car at Brands Hatch, I mean, it was like a light switch. You'd step on the accelerator, and it was like nobody was home, and then all of a sudden it was like boom, you got 1,000 horsepower at the rear wheels, and I remember Herbie Blash, who was the team manager. He said, Davy, he says, what Nelson does is that he when he brakes for the corner, he brakes, he turns in, and he steps on the accelerator, and just before the boost kicks in, he comes off the accelerator, then he feeds it back in. Well, that's something that just comes with just seat time and patience and practice and all that. So with that day, it was really quite an eye opener, and I just said, to myself and the likes that I really need to do another season from the three before I make that step into
Yeah.
Formula One.
And you were saying you just graduated high school and you were like pretty much all alone, just living in the UK, sort of figuring it out.
So I was living in a little village called Shuttlinger, which was just outside of Toaster, which is next to Silverstone Racetrack. And
Okay.
I had a roommate, Joe Stoop, who was kind of the truck driver for the team. He was like kind of like the CEO of fun and so on. So he was a good guy. But it all kind of comes full circle. The house that Joe and I were renting, a little cottage, was actually Derek Daly's. Derek Daly had come to the States to do IndyCar, and so Murray Taylor Racing, that I was racing for, had set it up to where I would, this was the accommodations that I was going to live in, and my roommate was going to be Joe Stoop and so on, and it worked out really well. It was nice. So, we had bus. We had Volkswagen as an engine supplier, which was another thing where both Aryton, Senna, and Brundle had a Toyota engine, and I had a Volkswagen engine, so it was always trying to keep as competitive as possible there. But Volkswagen had supplied me a little Scirocco GTI to drive around while I was there, so it made it real nice.
It sounds like, I mean, it's pretty crazy because it's Ron Dennis that really is the guy who opened the door for you for Formula 3. And like, what do you think he saw in you at that point? Because you really didn't have that much experience racing.
Well, I
And,
think I think that he saw, a young American that had, a lot of potential, a lot of talent, and I think he saw an opportunity to tap into the American market, by bringing a driver on, into the Formula One series. I don't know if the opportunity would have been there for me to race Formula One. I mean, I've had a couple opportunities just to do some testing, but for me to go Formula Three racing again in 1994 or '84, I'm not saying that I had the opportunity to go Formula One by any means, but that's kind of where the path had taken me is to, I probably should have done a second year in 1984 British Formula 3 series, but the opportunity was for me to race with Eddie Jordan Racing in the European Formula 3 series. That year was, it was Gerhard Berger, it was Johnny McFreeze, it was Pirro. I mean, the drivers that were, you know, we're all racing against. It was amazing to see where they had gone after the European Formula 3 series and into the different series and be a successful race driver.
I just feel like that era that you were racing in is just it's name after name after name, and I wonder if that's just something that's cyclical or it's just a point that we're 40 years since then now, so it's all kind of come to fruition and their careers have played out, so they are those names they are now. That's wild though, man. How was so racing in?
I think if you look at it, Cole, a lot of the race series, worldwide, if you get up into the top, 3, 4 positions and you're competitively there, then you're pretty stout. I mean, you've got a great opportunity to make something of it. It's the guys that are just in the race to be in the race that really don't go anywhere.
But I mean, if you're talking about Formula 3, like the European Championship, at that point, every guy in a race seat there is trying to make a career out of that position, aren't they?
For the most part, I would say the upper 5, 6 drivers are, but if you go a little bit further down the grid, they're doing it really as a hobby, or they're funded and funding it themselves and so on. So from the 1984 European Formula 3 series, McLaren had put together an IMSA program with BMW. And I had come back to the States for the 1985-86 season to race for the McLaren BMW in the IMSA GTP series.
Okay.
But during the winter months, I had gone down to New Zealand to race for Atlantic. And,
wow.
And so, I ran the Tasman series, I think 3, 4 times. I won the championship, I think 3 times. It was pretty cool. I mean, the Formula Atlantic was just such an awesome car. I mean, the power to weight, the size of the tires and the downforce. It was just, it's a great combination of the whole package of a car, and I adapted to it really well.
Davy Jones before terribly long. Jones will want to get by him as quickly as he can to get the advantage of the clear road.
Going to New Zealand, I look back at it as like, there was the television series, with Fantasy Island. The guest for the island would get off the airplane and they become the superstar for whatever reason. And then when they would leave the island, they would go back to a normal person. Well, I'd go to New Zealand and I'd win races, and it would be every race would be, televised, and you have all the headlines in the newspaper and so on, and they would recognize me just walking down the street in Auckland, New Zealand, or Christchurch, New Zealand, and so on. So it was really kind of cool, because you go to New Zealand to race and you're this big superstar, and then you come back to the States to race and you're just kind of the average guy.
That sounds awesome. Was there a step at that point between Formula 3 and then something and then Formula 1, like there's today, or you actually just go directly into Formula 1 traditionally from F3 back then?
So traditionally you would go Formula 3, Formula 2, and then into Formula 1. But that year, from 83, you had Aryton Senna that stepped into the Tolman and did extremely well. And then there was Brundle that kind of jumped into Formula 1 and was competitive. So, there was a period there where they were taking young drivers straight from Formula 3 and bringing them straight into Formula 1. Nowadays, you have the progression is Formula 3 to Formula 2. You have to score, your super license points, to get into the Formula 1 series. So.
Yeah. So it sounds like the opportunity that you got in IMSA with the BMW prototype, in a way, this was an amazing opportunity that opened you up into sports car racing. But at the same time, do you feel that it closed you off to get into Formula 1 at that point, or into Formula 2 and then Formula 1?
Well, it was really the only opportunity that I had. I mean, it's, I was kind of, you kind of go where the path is taking you. If I had a sponsor that was putting a few $1,000,000 behind me and I could dictate my own path, then it'd be a different story. But when you don't have any money behind you, and you're looking to be a paid racing driver, you're kind of going where the opportunity takes you. So McLaren brought me to the States, back to the States, and that was really my first really paid opportunity in racing. So where everything was all taken care of, all my expenses, and I was being paid to race. So that was kind of the turning point there. And it was a great experience. They teamed me up with John Andretti. So John Andretti and I were in one car, and David Hobbs and John Watson were in the sister car. John and I were the young lions, racing with two veteran Formula One drivers, and that was a big step as well forward, not only for me but for John Andretti as well. Going from the likes of a Formula 3 car, which was relatively, 100 and maybe 80 horsepower max, a really light car, probably weighs, 1,000 pounds or thereabouts, into a car that weighed, 2,200 pounds and nearly 1,000 horsepower.
Wow. And that was also your first time driving like sports cars, right? Because your whole career at that point had been in Formula cars. How did you kind of go about training and learning how to do that? Or it was just, hey, I can drive a Formula 3 car pretty well. I'm sure I can figure this out.
Well, it took a little bit, but like I said earlier, it's like, as a racing driver, you just adapt to the vehicle you're driving. You got to accept it for what it is. So the IMSA GTP car, it was a heavier car. It was big, bulky, and it had a lot of horsepower. And the more seat time that I had, the closer that margin kind of came to where, you would be, a few seconds off David Hobbs and John Watson, to where, there would be sessions you get in the car and you're as quick as them. And then there's sessions you get in and you're slightly off. And then you get back in the car and you're quicker. So it was just seat time to really be able to just hone everything in what the car wanted and so on.
That was your first year then driving in an actual endurance race, like a 24-hour like Daytona.
So when the BMW program, we had a lot of difficulties. We had a great team. but we just had a lot of glitches with the car. There's a lot of bugs that just, just luck wasn't on our side. We had some problems with some fuel fittings on the car that were swelling up and vibrating off and causing fires from the heat of the turbo and the vibration. We had body work that was flying off the car, was delaminating, and we destroyed a couple cars, with just some mechanical issues and so on. So we had a tough go of it. We did manage to win a race or two, which I did at Watkins Glen. But BMW, they decided, from what I understand, they took the sponsorship money of what they put into that program and decided to put it into an airline magazine. So that program went away, and then I was searching to where was I going to go from racing the IMSA GTP cars with McLaren, and that's where I had an opportunity to go IndyCar racing with AJ Foyt racing.
How did that come about? Did you just started making calls and you kind of had known AJ Foyt from previous series?
So, yes, I made some calls, but then again, it's going back to who you know. And I happen to know Tony George, and a good friend of Tony George is Brad Craig. So through who you know, they kind of help get you set up and plant the seed for you to what can become. And fortunately, AJ Foyt put me in a car. We did some testing. We went to Indianapolis for my rookie year and so on, and happened to be in the right place at the right time as well.
And that was running a season in IndyCar at that point, or that was for the 500?
Well, it was, when you race for AJ Foyt, it's kind of on his terms. So for me, it was we did the Indy 500, but it was really it was a race by race and how he felt. So, for example, I did the Indy 500, and then the week later, I worked the pit board for him at Milwaukee Speedway, which is a little mile oval. And then from there, we went to the Michigan 500, which I drove in. But when I got there, the car sat for 2 days until AJ Foyt got there. And then, he got in the car and practiced the first day. And then he says, okay, why don't you go out and practice? And so it was kind of, a hit or miss, when I would drive the car, race the car, and so on.
That sounds kind of nerve-wracking to say the least.
And then during that time, Tony Dow had scouted me out because he was putting together Tom Walkinshaw's race program here in the States for 1988, and that's when I signed a program with Castrol Jaguar to do their IMSA GTP series, as well as race some races in Europe.
Which then opened you up to the 24 Hours of Le Mans. That was with TWR, but that was with the Silk Cut Jaguar at that point?
It was. So
I was a different sponsor. Yeah.
Yeah, so I was racing. It was the Castrol Jaguar in the States, and then I did a handful of races in Europe that year for the Silk Cut Jaguar, all under the Tom Walkinshaw banner.
Okay. And was then, I guess, the Daytona 24 a couple years prior was your first proper 24-hour endurance race with BMW you did it that season?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
So I had done, the BMW. We had done the 24 Hours Daytona. I think we had done the 24 Hours Daytona like twice previously with BMW. And then when that program stopped, I went IndyCar racing for a year, but it was only a handful of races, with AJ Foyt. And then it was I signed a multi-year program with Tom Walkinshaw Racing and Jaguar So that was the first year that I went to Le Mans in 1988 then. So, and again, Cole, it's kind of, you're kind of going with the flow. You're going where the path is taking you. Would I have liked to stayed in Indy cars and done a competitive, program there? That would have been nice, but the opportunity wasn't there.
I'd like to talk about Indy for a few minutes. Indy 500. That's pretty cool. You're doing at those era cars about 240 miles per hour, right? I think that was some of the fastest cars in Indy history, right?
It was, and then they're starting to get back up there now, but yeah, if you do a lap at back then, 233-mile-an-hour average, your fastest straightaway speed was 248 mile an hour going into turn 3.
Wow.
And your slowest speed was turn 2 was 227.
Wow. Do you feel that speed? Like, right, because Indy's such a massive oval. From a perception standpoint, do you realize how fast you're going?
It's if the car is doing 230 mile an hour, it's a nice feel. If the car is doing 215, you're kind of white knuckling it because it's just not, the balance isn't quite right there and so on. So it's, it just all comes down to the package that you have. The aero package, the engine, and the boost, everything has to be just right. But yeah, it's almost at Indianapolis. The faster you go, the better it is. It's when the car is not quite balanced right, and it's twitchy, is when you really feel like you're going fast, but you're not.
And so in 1996, you came in second at Indy. This is huge. Right, one of the highlights of your career, I'd say. Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, in hindsight, it would have been nice to win that race,
Yeah.
but that's racing. And that's a story within itself of that particular race and how it went about and how it ended. But then 2 weeks later, I won the 24 Hours of Le Mans for Porsche, driving the Yost car. So it was really cool. It was nice.
So then let's just chat briefly about the 24 Hours of Le Mans.
I'd like to say that each year at Le Mans, I had an opportunity to lead the race outright. And over the 5 times I've been at Le Mans, I managed to finish third, second, and then first overall. The year that I finished second overall, again, hindsight, I should have won that race, but that's another story within itself. But happy to finish second. But to win Le Mans in 1996, it was like, here you have something that you want to achieve as a racing driver. It's a goal to win the Indy 500, to win the 24 Hours Daytona, to win the 24 Hours of Le Mans. Once you win a race like that, it's like now the goal is to back it up to win it again. And it's unfortunate that that in January of the following year of 1997, I was injured in the IndyCar, so I wasn't able to go back and to repeat Le Mans win, which the team and the car that I had won in the previous year won again in 1997. But it opened up the door for Tom Christensen. So him as a rookie, it opened up the door for him to step into my seat, say, and to see Tom go on and be Mr. Le Mans.
So you said it was a story in a story, and we don't want to hear the whole story right now, but that you came in second place at Indy, and then you came one time in second place at Le Mans. What's going through your head? It sounds like you said that in retrospect you should have won those races. Is that really true? At the time you've done the best you possibly could, right? Is that a frustrating feeling for you, or could you actually have won those races? Or looking back, you did what you had to do at that point. It wasn't necessarily in the cards then.
Well, when you win a race, I look at it as that, I did my job to the best that anybody could have done it on that particular day. in the team, they did their job to the best. The pit stops were expedited. Everything went flawless on the track, and we ended up the winner. So it's a team effort. Looking back, it finished in second by .006 seconds at Indianapolis. I had a little altercation with Alicia Salazar on the front straightaway, where he kind of pushed me into the wall a little bit, and I had to back off the throttle and to make sure the car was okay. And fortunately, it was okay, but I lost time there, and I got passed and felt a little bit behind. Coming back towards the front, right at the end of the race, coming towards the end of the race, is where you want to run the car full reg, and it's about another 48 to 50 horsepower. And I wasn't able to do that because I was low on fuel. And if I had done that, I would have run out of fuel and not finished, or I would have had to make a pit stop, and that would put me right down.
Is that air fuel mixture something you're controlling in the car?
Correct. Yes.
Okay.
So I left it to where I was actually down on power, so we could finish the race. And then hindsight afterwards to find out that I did have enough fuel in the car where I could have gone full reg.
Wow.
So it's little things like that yes, from the outside world, I finished second and it was .006, but I know for myself as the driver what actually, what went on and so on and how that came out. So delighted to finish second, happened to do that. When I finished second at the 24 Hours of Le Mans, it's 1991. That was the year and the only year that they regulated how much fuel each team could use for the duration of the race. So every team was monitoring what the other teams were using in regards to fuel. And I was leaving Le Mans, coming towards the last stint. I had to slow my pace down to be able to finish on the amount of fuel that was given to us. And the Mazda, they didn't slow down. They came up and I radioed, and they said, "Don't worry, Davy, he's going to come back to us. He doesn't have enough fuel to finish." So here I am, because of the fuel regulation, I had to back off, 10, 15 seconds, 20 seconds a lap to be able to finish the race on the required amount of fuel. And the Mazda never came back to us. So it was kind of like, here as a driver, you're being really conservative and you're driving at a much slower pace than you're not really racing. You're just trying to finish on per the rules.
Yeah.
Where I look back at it like if I would have kept my pace and I would have finished, we would have won that.
You had a really gnarly accident in '97. You mentioned in the IRL cars, right? I think you went backwards into a wall about 180 miles per hour or so. Broke your back or broke your neck initially, right?
So that was what it appeared, but no, I had a neck injury when the car. Looking back at it, Cole, we had some data. Delco Electronics was our sponsor, and we had some data that we captured on the car. And when the car went backwards in the wall at 178 mile an hour. The impact was 107 Gs, but it wasn't so much the first initial hit that did any injuries. It was the second hit where it came across the track and hit the inner pit wall because something had let loose with the seat belts or something, from what I understand. And what happened was that my neck had just stretched out like a severe whiplash, where I stretched and tore the ligaments in my neck. So it was, it was trauma. Did some damage and so on, which took 18 months to 2 years to kind of cure and rejuvenate and all that kind of stuff. But I'm blessed. I'm fortunate that I'm 100%, and I can get back in a race car and go just as quick as I was, or dirt bike, or whatever. So I've recovered 100%, and I'm pleased with that. Since then, they introduced the Hans device, made it mandatory, and now you don't really have so much of the the neck, as I've always thought, was something that really wasn't protected in a race car. You had your 5-point harness, and you had this monocoque that was built around you and so on to protect it, but your head was always exposed to the elements.
Yeah. Man, do you think with the Hans device that would have really helped you at that point? Yeah.
It would have, yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
when they were developing it, back then the Hans device was really kind of big and awkward and bulky, and it was just something that was really in kind of the test developmental stages.
Yeah.
And there was another driver that had a similar injury that I had, and he recovered. It was Jack Hewitt, the sprint car driver. And then also with the same similar injury was Dale Earnhardt Sr. So it's a severe whiplash, and if you don't have medical attention right away, or if you're not treated properly, it could go the other way.
Sure. Well, cool. Davey, thank you so much, man. I really appreciate you taking the time. It's like super interesting. It's a wild story that you've had, like a hell of a path.
Yeah,
so,
thanks for giving me the time. And I look back. I had a short stint in NASCAR, which was way cool, and to have that opportunity, that came through the IROC series, which I did 4 years, and so a lot of different types of racing and different types of cars, and I had a lot of fun, doing it through the years. When you're in the game and racing the game, you're going with the flow. It's the next race. And it's not really until you step back from the sport that you realize, like, man, I did all that. That was pretty impressive. It was way cool. I mean,
of all those cars that you drove, did you have a series or a car that was your favorite experience?
I would say Formula Atlantic was absolutely, the funnest, the most competitive, and car and series that I really enjoyed a lot. I think as far as a car would be the Jaguar, the XJR 14. That car for us that year was designed by Ross Braun, who designed Michael Schumacher's Ferrari F1 cars for 10 years. And we were sharing engines with the Benetton Formula One team, which basically was a Ford Cosworth, normally aspirated V8. The car weighed 1,650 pounds, and at speed it produced 7,500 pounds of downforce. So it was a phenomenal car.
Wow, that's very, very cool. And one other question then, because you mentioned NASCAR, and I'm curious because one of the school videos I did was a NASCAR one, and it's really hard to get close to a wall and to learn that, and it's a lot of muscle memory and retention. That must have been something that took you a little bit of while to learn, even with all your experience. That's a crazy experience, driving a NASCAR.
So driving, NASCAR, they're heavy cars. They're on skinny tires, and if you have a new set of tires, the car is bitching and drive. It's hooked up, and it drives like a proper race car. But as soon as those tires wear, they get grain to them, it starts wobbling around, and you got the springs and the heaviness and all. And for me, NASCAR was like almost like the slower you drove the car, the faster you went. And the likes of Mark Martin and Rusty Wallace and Dale Earnhardt, those guys, they grew up through the circle track ranks and modifieds and so on, and they could really drive the car to where you'd hear them say a lot in the after the races, like, well, I only had like an 8th place car today, or I only had a 20th place car today, or I had a car that was really hooked up today. And it was a situation to where they would only drive it to what the ability of the car was, to where myself coming out of formula cars and sports cars, you drive 10 tenths 100% of the time, and I had to learn that if the car wasn't a 10 tenths car, you had to just drive it around 70 or 80%. And it was a weird feeling for me, to just drive
Yeah.
around and so on. So it took a lot to get used to, the NASCAR. But now, with their Gen 5 car, I mean, it's a proper race car now. It's totally different what they're racing now.
Yeah, it almost seems like it's too good now. It's too much like a hooked up sports car.
Yeah,
So,
and they're enjoying it. I mean, it makes for good racing.
yeah.
Theoretically, it's a spec car, but it makes for good racing.
Awesome. Well, Davey, thank you again so much. I'll just pause the recording, and let's see if you just give it 1 second here.